So let's kick it off. My name is Muthoni, Muiruri, and I will be your moderator for today. And today I am speaking with Dennis Mugaa, Kenyan writer and editor, originally from Meru, currently based in Nairobi. And I have an entire page of a list of achievements and works for Dennis. And so, short story. Yesterday, I've been telling everybody about this session. Please come to the session with Dennis Mugaa. I'll be moderating a session with Dennis Mugaa. So I've been going around talking about this session. And yesterday, I was hosting a book club discussion. And one of the people I was speaking to said, Dennis Mugaa, I've heard about Dennis Mugaa a lot this year. He's all over the place, right? And so I think for anybody who is unaware of who Dennis Mugaa is, let me plug you in. Let me tell you who Dennis Mugaa is. Dennis Mugaa has won the 2022 Black Warrior Review Fiction Contest. He's been shortlisted for Isele Magazine's inaugural short story prize, and was also longlisted for the 2021 Afritondo Short Story Prize. His work has appeared in, let's start counting, Transition, Off Assignment, Fantasy Magazine, Jalada Africa, Lolwe, The Republic, Isela Magazine, should I continue? The Washington Review Square, the Washington Square Review. He has also been an International Literary Seminar Fellow, and he was the 23-24 Rajat Nioji Editorial Fellow at A Longhouse. We're not yet done. Mugaa has an MA in Creative Writing from the University of East Anglia, where he was the 2021-2022 Miles Moreland Foundation Scholarship recipient. His work has appeared in several anthologies, including Letters Conspire, which is this one, published in 2024 by Jahazi Press. Hi, Ahmed, I see you there. Ahmed is the publisher at Jahazi Press. And his debut short story collection, Half Portraits Underwater, also published in 2024 by Masobe Books. So this book, by Masobe Books, West Africa, Jahazi Press, Kenya. And I can see Otuke. Hi. So both his publishers are in the room. So like you can see, Dennis Mugaa has a long list of accolades, accomplishments. He's been doing the work for quite a long time. And today our focus is going to be, Half Portraits Underwater, but we're going to have a broader discussion. So can we put our hands together for Dennis Mugaa? So Dennis, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to see all of you. Thank you for making the time to come. And yeah, I can't wait for us to have a good discussion on the book.
Yeah. I mean, so my first question, and we were talking about this when we were in the green room. Yeah. And just even drawing from my friend who was saying, Dennis Mugaa, I've seen him a lot this year. What have you been up to this year?
So of course I've been okay. The most recent thing I did is, or rather I'm doing is, I'm in this program called. I got into this program called FOMO Collective. So it's where it was started by Ella Afri, Billy Kahora, and Nikki. So it's where you write a nonfiction project about something that's very important to you, but based on a topic called citizen. So like, what does it mean to be Kenyan today? And of course, my project is going to be based around what the Kenyan protests have meant for being a citizen of Kenya. Yeah, so that's what I'm working on currently. Yeah.
And this was in Ghana?
Yeah, so there's a workshop in Ghana which I just completed, but now the project itself takes 3 months and another 3 months for editing, but I'm not exactly sure, but that's yeah, that's pretty much what I've been doing. And of course, working, because one is not just a writer, so I've been working at my actual job now.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of writers wear many hats.
Yeah.
And I think it's what Dennis is saying. There's still a lot that has been done and is being done. Yeah. But I want us to jump straight into the book. Half Portraits Underwater, fantastic title. I think it's a very gripping title, and maybe we can talk about that a little later. And it's collection of 10 interconnected stories, you know, exploring themes of love, grief, memory, politics, you know, social political change. It's spanning across Africa and the diaspora. And in doing my research for this conversation, I do a lot of research, guys, just so you know. I read an interview that you had done, and you talked about Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell being an inspiration, you know, for this particular story. And, you know, we were talking about this, and I said, I would also compare it to Homegoing by Ajasi. How many of us have read Homegoing?
Oh, okay. That's nice.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us have read Homegoing. And in the interwoven structure of just how the stories are told, you know, standalone, but together they form this really beautiful mosaic, and they make a lot of sense when they're read together. There's this expansiveness of time, and stories told through an expansiveness of time. There's also this idea of, you know, personal stories told alongside, you know, political stories. And I was curious about, what about Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell spoke to you the most?
I think first of all, I was fascinated by how the book is structured. So Cloud Atlas is both a book and a film. So I don't know, maybe if someone has not read the book, they've read the film. But it's essentially about how how our stories are cyclical, like one leads into the other. So there are 6 stories in Cloud Atlas, and each one is by the same person. So the person dies, and then they come back as something else. And then they are linked by, the idea in Cloud Atlas is that when you're reborn, your tattoo, or not your tattoo, your birthmark is the same in each reiteration of you. So I think I found that idea fascinating, but also what was most fascinating about it is this idea that you could be, things are always interconnected. So in my book, I think the idea, I expanded this idea a bit, because even David Mitchell's Cloud Atlas came from a book by Italo Calvino, the Italian author, called If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. It's about this person who starts a story but never finishes. So the story starts, and then instead of it finishing, it just, another one starts over and over again. But with my book, I was trying to think of this idea of how important we are in other people's lives. Say, for instance, one's mother has a huge impact on their life as opposed to a person that they meet. So like this person can have a small role in your life, but then they have this wider life of their own that you may not be privy to. Yeah, so that was a big idea of the book. Yeah.
I mean, thinking about just the interconnected nature of these relationships, which was something that I was really drawn to. And done so expertly, you know, but in reading I was wondering what are maybe some of the challenges you faced in sustaining the interconnectedness of the stories while still, you know, making them very standalone and complete by themselves.
So I don't think it was a challenge per se, because
no challenges here.
No, not like that. But
no, don't be humble. Just say.
What happened is that I was writing stories, not necessarily to put them in a collection, but writing stories to experiment, to see experiment, number one, with form, and number two, with what characters mean. And sorry, not what characters mean, but what characters can mean for a story. Yeah. So in experimenting with this, I wrote many different stories. but some characters started to reappear in other different stories. And then when I did a master's program in creative writing, one of my teachers was like, oh, why don't you put some stories together and so that it can be a collection. And I had about 8 stories, which seemed as if they could form a collection. And then I just added 2 more. And also sometimes the processes can be very, it's not like a genius process really, because you can now, at the end when you're done, or when you're trying to put it in a collection, you're like, oh, but this person can meet this other person, and these connections could feel organic. And yeah, that's how I did it. And then the other 2 stories, I made sure that they were related to the others. So, and the organizing, of course, I have to give credit to the editor, Tahira, who was very instrumental in now helping me to make them flow. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So kudos to Tahira.
Yeah, Tahira, yeah.
Fantastic job. That's why we need editors.
Yes,
they help us see the things we are unable to see. I'm just curious, which 2 stories did you add?
Okay, the last 2 stories that I did was the second story. The second story is about the death of Tomboya. So this person who dies in the second story is called the minister. But it was an easy story to do because it's about truth, the idea of truth, and especially in Kenya where things, when something major happens, we don't really know what happened. Like everyone has their own story. Oh, this happened to this person, this happened to this person, but you never really get to the point of truth. So like this story is about every person having their own idea of truth, and they're being questioned by the Commissioner of Police at that particular period in time. And what this story was, what I was trying to do with this story is like, I feel like a lot of readers are reading it as history, but also it's important to be careful in the sense that because there are some things I falsified to make the story be flow, because sometimes you, like they say, you can't let the truth get in the way of a good story. Yeah, so, and with fiction you're allowed to make up your own stuff, yeah. Mm-hmm. And then the other story which I did in the end was, of course, the last story. Yes, it's about a character called Naila who is grieving the death of her grandmother, and she was unable to see her grandmother because of COVID, because she's in England and her grandmother dies in Kenya. So what does it mean to grieve when you can't see the people who you love? Yeah.
Oh, thank you for that. Now I'm just trying to piece it together in my head to see the genius that you were still able to bring back some characters. Fantastic. In the first story in the book, The Distance in Between, we're introduced to this character of Wangari, who is a beneficiary of the Mboya airlifts. I think we all know about the Mboya airlifts, between late 50s, early 60s. A lot of East Africans, a lot of Africans went to the US to study, and we meet Wangari in New York with her African-American boyfriend, and she's struggling with the decision, do I return because she has a new job at the Ministry of Finance in this newly independent Kenya. She has a love in New York that wants her to stay, but we also see her heavily invested in the civil rights movement in the US. And in the story, we see them, trying to catch a bus from New York to Washington to participate in the famous, I Have a Dream speech. And you drew this direct parallel so perfectly. And it was one of those things where I know this has been happening. I knew, the Pan-African movement, the civil rights movement, and the struggle for African independence were happening at the same time. But something about how you told this story brought it into such sharp focus for me, which I really loved. And I'm wondering, why was it important for you to connect these two historical moments in that way?
Thank you for that question. That's a really good question because I feel it's still, the airlift is still it's still unraveled, like it's still hey, my English is gone. Reverberate till date. So who here has followed the U.S. mayoral election for New York? Yeah, so there's this person who's just won the Democratic nomination for the mayor. He's called Zoran Mamdani. Zoran Mamdani is the son of Mahmoud Mamdani. And Mahmoud Mamdani went to the US through the airlift program. He got a scholarship, I think, in 1963. He was one of the last people. The airlift program, I think, went on for 4 years, between 1959 and 1963, if I'm not wrong, but I can't really recall the exact. But Mamdani, the older Mamdani, he went to protest with the civil rights movement. And Mahmoud Mamdani was put in jail by the American justice system. And then he was allowed to make a call because he was like, so he made the call to the Ugandan ambassador. And then it's like, oh, I've been arrested. I was protesting with the civil rights movement. And then the ambassador tells him, were you sent there to study or to take part in protests? So I feel like in this, when you look at what that story brings out is this idea that at that period of decolonization and the civil rights movement, these two were not differentiated really per se, because first you're fighting against oppression, but oppression, of course, in different means. And another idea of the story is that the airlift program, in as much as it has been explored through non-fiction, it's been written about, I've never actually seen it in fiction. So part of the reason why I was writing about the airlift program is to try to understand what really happened to many of the Kenyan students who went abroad, because of course many of them were they were given this expectation that they were to come back, because consider this: the Great Britain, Africa, they had 8,000 students 8,000 people who were university-educated people at the end, as the colonial period neared its end. And 4,000 of those people came from Ghana and Nigeria. And Kenya did not really have university graduates because of the Mau Mau revolution. So the colonial government was like, oh, we can't give these people scholarships because, they're revolting, so it doesn't make sense. So a lot of them now, sorry for the long history lesson, but that's how many of them now found their way to America through the Kennedy and Boyer airlift. I think if you ever get a chance, please read about that whole program. It's really, really interesting. Yeah.
Just to add to that, it's the program that gave us Obama.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. Although Obama was actually a very resourceful man, because he already had his own scholarship. He just needed a lift, like an actual lift. So, because he had gotten admission, he had gotten all these things on his own, he just needed an actual lift. Yeah, so that was also fascinating about Obama. Yeah.
Oh, thank you for that. I'm sure we have people on Google trying to Google that history, because I'm going to go and look at it some more after this. So while we are on Tom Mboya, and it's a story that you've mentioned, you added as one of your last ones. And I like that it appears actually earlier on in the book. The story, The Fallen World of Appearances, which fictionalizes this assassination of Tom Mboya. And is told through witness statements, different people coming to give their statements, the pharmacy owner and Wangare, who, we meet again in this story, who was the assistant of the minister. And this story has a very fascinating ending, but we're not going to spoil it, because we need you to go out there, buy the book, and actually read the story. Very fascinating ending there. But what struck me the most when I was reading this story is the confession of the self-proclaimed killer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he comes on and says, I did it, and this is how I did it. Ask me how I got a gun. You know, he's very willing to give information. And he goes on a tangent and gives the reasons why, and he says, you know, independence did not bring him what he thought. He's been unable to find a job. He's now, you know, gotten into alcoholism. He's drinking too much. The fruits of independence are not what he had been promised. And so there's this sense of disillusionment in him, and this sense of, okay, what do I have to lose? I have nothing to lose. And I want to correlate that with the story of the Invincibles, the story that follows Hakim and Yusuf, you know, from a poorer side of the city, but they derive so much joy from going to the field and playing soccer, and they have dreams of being scouted to play professional football in Europe or whatever. And this field seems like a lifeline for them until one day they go to the field and, you know, there's a fence around it. It's public land that has now been appropriated by a politician. And in that story, we see the death of their dreams. We see that they never played football, that the scout never came. So again, sinking into that disillusionment and hopelessness that I was talking about. And when I was thinking about just how those stories are linked, we've been having demonstrations. I think we're in a very precarious time in our democracy in Kenya. And 2 weeks, I think 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, when we had demonstrations and goons invaded the peaceful demonstrations. You know, and they harassed the demonstrators. But the next day on the papers, there was this image that had been, you know, put out front page of the paper, which showed some of those goons. And so I was, you know, doom scrolling on my Twitter. I still call it Twitter, by the way. I have refused to move to X. So as I'm scrolling, I saw a comment under that photo. And that comment said, these two men in this photo are actually brothers, and they were part of my football academy until a politician shut us down, right? And I was like, oh my God, look at that. Look at something that you wrote years ago in a fiction book happening in real time in, you know, in Kenya. And I thought that was such an interesting depiction of how literature can mirror society, but also how the political and the personal intersect. And how do you then balance when, you know, when you're creating your characters and you're telling these stories, how do you balance that personal story with the political?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. But I think the simple answer is that you can never really escape the political, because a week ago on the 17th, I think, like 2 weeks ago on the 17th, the person was selling masks during the protest, Boniface Karaoke. He was just selling masks, like he was just going about his life selling masks. I mean, it was a difficult moment in town, but he was just going about his day, and a police officer shot him in the head. And now his life has, if he makes it, his life has still completely transformed. So the personal there is, the politics is there, like in your face. So I sometimes, it's not really a balance per se, it's just there, like it's simply there. Because part of the inspiration of this story is, I had worked with as a volunteer with the Muthoni Social Justice Center and also the Muthoni Green Movement. And during the course of this, talking to them and also like trying to do the volunteer work that you are going to do, I found out that the police had requisitioned, the police, okay, how do I say it? Stolen, land, a playground that they used to play in. So I was thinking about that, and I was like that's such a huge death of dreams, because for a lot of low-income areas, talent sometimes can be the difference between you and the life that you're going to live. So Yeah, I think it's art mirroring reality, but it's also reality mirroring art in this sense. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think just on a sad note, with the story of the mask seller I think I saw a news article today that he's been declared brain dead.
Yes, yeah.
Which is quite unfortunate.
Yeah, quite sad, yeah.
So moving on to another story, and I think, you were asking me what my favorite story is in the book, and I think I have a very soft spot for this particular story, which is the only one I have not lost. And this story centers a Somali refugee woman and her young son in Nairobi. And she has lost almost everybody in her life, and the only person left is her son. And you can see that, desperation to keep the son safe, desperation to, want to provide for the son, desperation to also allow the son to be free and to have a life that she was not afforded because she has been displaced by conflict. And I was telling you, I have worked, with the refugee populations for quite a long time. And when I was reading Mama Yusuf, because she's an unnamed character in this book, so we refer to her as Mama Yusuf. And I could see layers and layers and layers of marginalization for a woman like her. One, being a refugee. Two, being a single mother who's trying to protect a son in an environment where, the government has decided to declare war on children, what we're currently seeing, but also being a woman at risk of exploitation. So there are so many layers to her marginalization. And so my question will come in two parts. One, I'm curious about why she does not have a name. I think out of the entire book, she's probably the only character who is referred to by Mama Yusuf, or she, she's not really given a name. But also, what was your inspiration to talk about this refugee story? Because it's also not one that I have seen a lot in our fiction.
Okay. So I had considered giving her a name. Or well, she does have a name, but her name is Ifra. But I think the idea of not mentioning the name is, of course, the invisibility of the refugee. How in Kenya also, we have a policy for refugees is where you have to go to a camp, encampment policy, I believe. So, but then sometimes that's not. That doesn't translate to reality. I mean, for the population which holds the country, it makes sense to be like, oh, the refugee has to be in the camp. But then, when we consider the refugee as a person, we start to get into the complexities of what a human being is. Because a lot of Somali people who lived in, let's say, for example, Mogadishu, who were middle class, who had businesses, who had this, why would they live in the camp? It doesn't make sense. Because, and even for anyone with skill, why would you live in the camp just to wait for the UN to help you? It doesn't make sense. Because even I, as Dennis, if there was a war in Kenya and I had to flee, and then Uganda had an encampment policy, I wouldn't live in the camp. I'd probably go to Kampala to hustle. So for me, that's sort of the difference between how a policy is and what real life entails is just two different worlds. And of course, we have to consider about what there's something that Edward Said, the post-colonial writer, where he talks about exile. That when one is in exile, one lives two worlds. The world that they're in currently, that they're living in, so the world that Mama Yusuf is living in, and the past world that they have left, which is still happening, which is still now in their mind. They're like, oh my God, I remember Mogadishu. And something I'll encourage everyone to see is to Google images of Mogadishu in the 80s. And how it just looked like. It's like, this place is so stunning. And I believe if Somalia was stable and had been stable, we would probably be going there for holiday. But Yeah, that's the whole idea, where you can have a country and then lose it suddenly, and I think that's so devastating for anyone, because sometimes it's just a click and then you no longer have a country. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. You've talked about this idea of exile and living in two worlds. The world you're currently in, but also the world that, you've left behind, and are you able to go back to that life? Are you in a temporary, situation where, it's a passive thing for you to kill time? And this idea of home and return is also, I think, a theme that sort of reverberates through the entire collection of stories. This desire to return, be it to a place, like Mama Yusuf, and now we know she's called Ifra. So Mama Yusuf, still longs for the Somalia, the Mogadishu that she left behind. In the story that we've just talked about with Wangari, we see her, struggling between, do I stay, do I go back, do I go back home and build something of myself, and what sacrifices does she then have to make to allow her to go back home? With Naila, we see her also just not being settled, moving from country to country. We first meet her on her way to Nigeria, and then she moves to the US, and then she moves to the UK, and then she moves back home. But yet she still does not feel very settled. And it got me thinking about this idea of home and what home is. Who is home a person? Who is home? And for you, Dennis, the writer and the person, what does home mean for you?
Yeah, okay, for me it's very simple. Kenyan home. It's a phrase which is simple, but it puts it in a very succinct manner. Why I say this is because there are places I've been to, let's say when I was studying for my master's, but I felt this essence of dislocation, like such a huge dislocation, where I felt, I have this life here, but then I really want to be somewhere else. And the French have a phrase for it. It's called, a word for it, it's called dépaysement. It's where you just feel like I'm not in the correct place. But it could have been also the city I was in, because when I was in, when now I stayed in London, I was like, I don't feel dislocated because everyone in London is an immigrant, or at least it seems like everyone in London is an immigrant. So I think the idea of home is where your heart feels settled. So I think that's the biggest thing, where your heart feels settled. And it depends also on who we are, how we were raised, because given the place I was born and the place now I live in, I have lived in a coastal city, and I'm like, it's so hot here. I don't feel at home here. I feel like a tourist. I feel like even if I was living there, I felt at some point I would always go back to where I came from. So I think home is a feeling where you feel like you can really relax. So that's what I would say. And also to what you're saying about characters looking for home in different places. Sometimes the dreams we have don't really allow us to stay home our whole lives, of course. Because if you only stay in one place, you'll never really experience the fullness of your life. So sometimes you have to leave your home, whatever the feeling that the other place will give you, it might also elevate you to other places. Something else I always find in Nigeria, because of how the state has become very dysfunctional, a lot of people leave Nigeria. There's this phrase for Nigeria, it's called Japa. So many of them have left, and many of them still continue to want to leave. But all of them, there's this thing that they always say, oh my God, I really wish Nigeria worked for all of us, so that we can all just live in Nigeria. So I think there's also,
Yeah. I mean, I think I want to agree in the sense that, home is and it's gonna sound so cliche, oh my God, forgive me guys, but home is where the heart is,
Yeah,
right?
that's true. Yeah.
It is where you feel like, your feet are grounded, where you feel comfortable, where you have support.
Yeah.
And I don't want to digress, but yeah, I was having a conversation with somebody like a returnee, and for them it was the sense of community that they lost when they left, and to get that back they were willing to forgo some of what they thought were their dreams to come back. The other thing I wanted to look at, which is really linked to this idea of home, in this book, which is honestly just fantastic, and I feel like it was written for me. Somanami books, we like saying from Cape to Cairo, the African bookstore, and we have books from across the continent. But reading your book was literally a journey through the continent. We start in New York, we go to Washington, but we come back to the continent, and we're in Nairobi, and then we're in Mogadishu, and we're in Lagos, we're in Egypt, we're in Cairo. It was fantastic journeying through these different African cities, which I felt each was richly layered with context and texture, right? Like you could almost taste and smell the cities that you were taking us on a journey on. And I got curious about what is the place, right, in shaping your character's identity. Is that something that you think about? And even for you, when you're writing, does place matter? Does where you're writing these stories matter on how, your characters are then going to be shaped?
Yeah, I feel like we are different things in different cities, first of all. Because, another point is that for the writer, or at least me in this case, it was important. I was lucky enough to travel to these different cities, and each city had its own character. For example, you could consider Lagos as being a very yellow city, number one because of the downfalls which travel, but also because it has a certain color, like there's a certain color to it. And also with Nairobi, also it depends on who is the observer. Because for me, Nairobi is sort of a city of pretense. Let's say you're coming from the airport, I think I wrote about this, when you're coming from the airport and you're a tourist, you'll use the expressway, you'll just see the city from the waist up, but you'll never actually get to see the ground and the people who are hustling. So you'll just be, but then you get to the ground level, you're like, oh my God, the city is this is what the city is. And also Nairobi is a city made for the colonizer, or rather the settler. So in some cities like Accra feel very made for blackness. You can feel it in your bones, because you can go to the alchemist here, you're like, hey, you're black, probably shouldn't be here. But I feel like every city has its own character, it has its own texture, and it inspires people differently. Because I remember being in New York made me feel very artistic, and it made art feel possible. Because it's there around you, it just makes you feel like everything you've ever. Let's say if you were an artistic person who was told you can't follow your dreams, you go to New York and you're like, everyone here is an artist. So you're like, everything feels very possible, very in touch. And which other city can I speak for? And of course, I never went to Mogadishu, but. Mogadishu feels like a city of broken dreams, and a city which hasn't really fulfilled its goal. And this is as an outsider's perspective. But each city has its own character, and each city is alive. That's what I'm trying to say. Each city is alive, and if you pay attention, you can see it.
So while we're still, on this issue of place and cities and characters journeying from one place to another, and African characters, And it's a question I think that a lot of people are asking nowadays is, can we then tell an African story without migration?
I think perhaps, well, I will say this. Yes, you can tell an African story without migration. I was lucky enough to meet an artist called Victor Ekimiano. I think yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Egosa.
Yeah. So, yeah. Yes. So Victor is one of the most amazing visual artists I've ever seen. And for the first 21 years of his life, he grew up in Benin. And Victor talks about the local, how to create art which comes from the local, like the things that you can see, that you don't have to go far, or you don't have to look for other cosmologies to tell your story. So yes, you can tell an African story without migration, but I'll say for my own work, I always like my work to have a sense of movement, of characters moving, and I think the story Let's Go to Egypt is the story which moves the most, because they're in different cities, they do this, they do that. It's a story of doing stuff in different cities. So I don't know, I like movement in my work, and I like the idea of movement from place to place. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I think I'm going to ask you to read something from the book.
Okay.
Feel free to grab it.
So I'll read a small section of the title story, as Muthoni advised.
I told him not to say that, and he's outed me.
So we don't have much time, so I'll try to read probably 2 pages, and then we can move on. So the title story is of course called Half Portraits Underwater, and it's a story told by Oluoma, the narrator. She's a 17-year-old who's going through grieving her sister, her twin sister. In the school's auditorium, my sister, Yagazie, is still dancing. She moves like a masquerade in a trance. Her fingers twirl, her hips sway, her body pirouettes. The beads around her waist slither along with her. Afro beats her guiding wave. This is how I see her now that she's no longer with me. I sit in the middle, 9th row, 5th chair. I retrieve my book. When she dances, I write. Her body speaks poetry. Dusk invades. No one else is around. She likes it this way. The interplay of sound, silence, and her body movements. She contorts her shoulders. The tempo rises, and as she turns with the rhythm, the late school bus spurs to life. I call out her name, but my words are shattered by music. I rise to tell her. Sweat drips. Her smell of pepper encircles me as the music reaches its crescendo. I reach out to her. She fades, merges with the air, and I fall on where she danced. Oluoma, what are you doing? The bus is leaving. A girl behind me says, rushing out before I see her. I sit at the front of the school bus. Behind me, at the back, the girls who play hockey laugh. Yagazie and I used to sit with them. I didn't talk to them much. Each time, Yagazie was my avatar in conversations. Once, they tried to get her to join the hockey team, but she loved dancing too much. The bus moves through the traffic. Ikoyi has a quite dilapidated charm. Today, it feels like a grandfather with long white hair, while Victoria Island sounds like Papa's baritone, deep and reassuring. We live in 1004 Estate. I alight at the street near our estate gate. The street sleeps through the day and rises at night. A heavy-set woman serves jollof rice to Okada riders. Farther along, fruit sellers have set up stalls. They sell pineapples, bananas, watermelons, and mangoes. They don't sell plantain, which I like. It's sold on a different street, a small distance from here, next to the Chinese restaurant. Yagazie always bought me some, even when I didn't want any. She stole money from Papa when he refused to buy something for us. Yeah, I think I'll stop there.
Thank you for that. So because already outed me. The reason I wanted, the reason I wanted you to read a passage from Half Portraits Underwater is because it is the title story, but also because it ushers us into part 2 of the book. Again, you need to go out and buy the book and read it, but the book is in 2 parts. You know, there's the first part, which is the echoes of history, which, you know, has a lot of historical, political context. And then we move on to the second part, which looks more at love and loss, you know, and grief. And the story of Olioma and Yagazie really stuck at me. You know, we meet Olioma, who is grieving the loss, not just of a sister, but of the disintegration of her family. But you brought out this grief for me so aptly and so intimately. This sort of like a quiet grief that is to some extent never ending, and you rendered it so beautifully. You know, and what did you want to communicate with that, and how are you able to render this grief not as a spectacle? Because, right, we think mourning and grieving has to be spectacular, you know, and in our context you have to shout and cry and wail and throw yourself on the floor. But what we see with Olioma is a very quiet grief that she sort of like internalizes, that she's trying to deal with in her own way, but also in isolation. And I thought it was so beautifully rendered. What were the places you had to go to bring out this grief?
Okay, that's a nice question. I mean, I could answer it in oh my God, I had so much, but no, I think it's an understanding of a simple idea about grief being eternal. Like you can never really get through grief, because of course I think in 2017 I lost my grandmother, and at the first instance, of course, you cry, but then as you go through life, there are moments which remind you of this person, let's say the anniversary of their death or this and this, and then you remember them all over again. So it was just essentially the idea of grief being eternal, but in 4,800 words. Yeah.
I mean, I love it, but yeah, thank you for doing it so beautifully. I think you just rendered it with so much grace for the character Olioma, you know, dealing with a really painful loss. So definitely appreciate that. And I'm sure a lot of readers are going to appreciate it when they do read that story. With that story, there's also this idea of water. And I want to talk about water because the title of the book is Half Portraits Underwater. And with Olioma, we see, you know, her a year later, you know, getting into a boat, going out into the water and releasing this, you know, photographs, these portraits that she had cut in half. And I was wondering, is it that she's letting go, or is it that she's preserving a memory? What do you think is, or how did you write this idea of water? Was it as sort of like an erasure of memory, or was it preserving memory?
Oh, that's a really good point. I've not really thought about that, to be honest. But yes, water does hold memory. And I think, of course, with West African waters, of course, you know, the memory of slaves being taken away. But of course, if someone drowns in this space, in this ocean, if you can't find a body to bury, where is the place which holds this memory of this person who you love? Yeah, so I think that's the idea of water in that book. Sorry, in that story, but also because the whole book is somehow cyclical, it connects, and we have to think of water as something which comes full circle, because water evaporates, then it comes back. So like there's that idea of a circle.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. At times I hunt down authors to ask particular questions. You know, like I was telling you earlier, yesterday I had to hunt down Ayana because I read her book in couple of years ago, and I still had some burning questions. So thank you for thank you for explaining that. We have a couple of minutes to go. I hate this timer, by the way. Like, it's just in my face telling me I need to wrap up. So I'm going to ask a question, one more question, and then open it up to the audience. So if you do have any questions for Dennis, we will get to you in a minute. Dennis, I think one of the other key themes that I picked up on the book is fractured relationships. Yeah. You know, especially if we're moving into the second part of the book with the stories, we see a lot of fractured relationships, be it, you know, friendships, you know, father-son relationships. We meet Tendai in 2 stories, and we see that strained relationship with the father, you know, and he's the one who takes us to Egypt as a way to escape that. But also coming a little bit full circle and meeting, you know, Naila and Wangare, who we meet and we love in the earlier stories. But we also see that fracturing of that relationship, right? With Nalia and the grandmother, I was really sad just to see how that relationship fractured. But when I'm thinking about it, it's also that generational expectation, right? That you ought to be this and you ought to be that. That was placed on somebody who wanted to forge, basically, you know, their own path. And, you know, I was curious about what did you want to explore about that generational expectation and how that can fracture love, especially, you know, with the younger generation who really want to, you know, push their own or create chart their own paths.
I think even if we follow with relationships between our parents, between us and our parents, between us and our caregivers, we always find, in as much as there is love, there are also other things. Because suddenly, maybe when you're growing up, this person was your hero, and they had this, they had that, and then suddenly, as you grow up, you're like, oh, hang on a minute, this person, I don't like the way this person tells me to do stuff, or I don't like the way, or even they could be, because like, let's say Tendo's father is a corrupt politician, is a corrupt business person. So how does he handle his father's love with what Tendo's father does? And of course, what happens now if we want something? We may love our parents, but let's say they don't want us to, because I know, like, especially in this Mandamano period, protest period, like a lot of parents, for good reason, don't want their children to go out to protest. But the children are like, I want to protest because it's my life that's on the line. So the parents' love here is expressed through their plead, please don't do it. But then the children are like, oh, but I have to do it. If I don't do it, who will? So it may cause a fracture in their relationship. But these two people are coming from two very, what's the word? Like, these viewpoints are not wrong. They're not wrong. So I think I always try not to be like, this person is wrong or this person is right, but try to find out how desires make us diverge in our relationships, or fracture in this sense.
And I guess also just how relationships can evolve, right? That what it looks like now might not be what it will look like in a couple of years. And I think that's just the reality of life and love and loss. Audience, my beautiful people, where are your questions? Okay, I see a couple of hands up. I think we have time for maybe 2 questions, 3 if they give me a bit more time. Okay, I have like 3 more minutes, so yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm really glad to have been able to make it to this session. I've just discovered you, Dennis, as a writer, and I'm so excited to discover more. So this is a collection of short stories. Two parts to my question. What do you think of the short story? There's a thinking out there that short stories are much more difficult to execute than sort of a longer novel. I don't know what you have to say about kind of the short story arc, and I'm interested to know how you approached it and what is your view of that? But also, is there a novel from you, maybe in the offing in the future?
Okay.
So we can get the questions and then you can answer. But
Thank you. Congratulations, Dennis. It is a good book. It is a good book, so well done. My question is based on what we were talking about previously, and that is the othering, right? Because the story that stayed with me, the Tomboya one, because I just watched the play, so everything I felt like was Tomboyaing in my head, so that was really fun. But the question here would be, because I think one of the things that you achieve with this book is empathy. And to me, that is the mark of good literature. Like, you evoke empathy. It makes me now look at someone else that perhaps I had not given enough consideration. So when you look at Ifra's story, for example, Mama Yusuf, and she, through her story, we get to see exactly what the Somali community in Kenya went through. Every time there's a sort of terrorist attack, every time there's, anything Al-Shabaab related, there's a whole grouping of basically Cushitic communities into, it's your fault that this has happened, and especially post-Westgate. So we think about it from our side, in terms of, when I say our side, as Kenyans, how hurt we felt because of all these terrorist attacks, but we don't realize, or rather I hadn't really thought about how bad it must have been to be Somali in Kenya at that time because of the profiling. And it was that, so the book really made me ask myself some hard questions. Was I othering? Am I really being on the right side of history? So my question now to you would be, was that deliberate for you to bring it out in the book, just to, give a little bit more context to perhaps a side that we hadn't considered as much as we should? Thank you.
Is there another question before we... Okay, great. It just means more questions for me. Dennis, go.
Okay, yes. So about our short stories, more difficult than a novel, yes, they are. I think they're very, very difficult. And it's not, what do I say it? The returns are not as, the return versus the doing benefit is just not there. But I think what they help you to do is, number one, they help you really to develop your craft and also to experiment with form. So I think they're a great way to get into the into literature, into writing, and also if one story doesn't work, you can easily let go of it as opposed to a novel. Yes, so I think I'll say that. Definitely I think short stories are difficult, and you only have a very short period of time to, one, grab an audience or to interest someone. Just essentially, it's if you do something wrong in a short story, it's very, very clear, and it's not going to work for someone else reading if you get it wrong. In a novel, audiences are more forgiving because you want to dive or delve more into the book, and you are more likely to give the book a chance. So that's how I think about the forms. As the work that I'm doing now, I mean, of course, I'm writing other things. Hopefully, I'll get to finish a novel. But writers are always writing something. So I think, but yeah, let's wait and see how all that comes out. Because I also want to write something good, something honest. And yeah, let's see how that works out. To Koi's question about, so I think Koi is really talking about what it means to other people. I think Toni Morrison has an essay about this where she talks about it's easy to other someone else so that it can, like your faults are not, like it's just easy to be like, oh, all our problems are the black people, yeah, the black people in this country, because that's what many European countries tend to do whenever there is a migrant crisis. It's not really a crisis because a lot more immigrants migrate to other neighboring countries. So like many more people migrate to, let's say, the neighboring countries. Like many more Somalis came to Kenya than went to Minnesota. But you'll see statesmen in America being like, hey, what were they? What did Trump call those guys? I can't remember, but he called them some nasty name. But also here in Kenya, I think with the wake of terrorism, a lot of the Somali community was, because I remember in 2013, or was it 2015, they were put in Kasarani Stadium. I was just like, what does, yeah, so like, what is that? What does that mean? And also you'll find that many of those who are put there have like they're actual Kenyan citizens. But even if someone is an exile, that doesn't give people the right to treat them without dignity. So I think we have to look at people as people. That's what I'll say. So to look at the other person as we see ourselves, and then maybe that way we are able to consider to make laws. Number one, to make laws which honor and uplift their humanity, and number two, we are able not to use force against them. Yeah. So yeah, that's what I think about that. Yeah.
Ergo, empathy. I think, so the last one that I will ask you, and I'll be very honest, I have stolen this question from this festival because I sat on a panel and the question was asked. And so I also want to ask you, in your writing, and you've had a lengthy career, who are your forefathers or foremothers? Who would you say you look up to, or somebody who has inspired your work and your writing and you still draw inspiration from?
Yeah, okay, this is actually a simple question. If I was to answer only one person, I'll probably say Chinua Achebe for his impact in African literature. And of course, the one thing I took a lot from his work is simplicity. Like, work has to be simple and clear. So if I'm writing stuff and I find myself using some big word, I'm just like, I cancel the big word, put in the easiest word, and to make the work as accessible as possible. So I think one of my big wishes is if someone reads my work, they're able to finish it quickly. Because whenever I read Chinua Achebe's work, I can finish it in an afternoon. So, and the complexity of the ideas are in simple sentences. So you don't have to use like really big concepts or big words or big, so I think that's one reason why I really like him. And of course, for his editorship of the African Writers Series, his stance on the Biafra War and what he did for Biafra, believing in a country that is no longer there or was no longer there when he was writing. So I think if I was to choose one person, I would probably choose him. But also there are many, many, many other authors who I have read and liked. And sometimes I suppose it's not really, it's hard to say if there's one person I can just be like, oh, this person is, because there are a lot. And I think the more you read, the more you're like, oh, there's all these other people whose work you can read. But yeah, so there's a lot of authors I would really like, yeah, not to write like, but who's thinking about writing that I like, yeah.
Yeah, I think, yes, we are also informed by everybody we encounter and the experiences we have of them, whether living or dead, whether through their works. And that's why literature is so powerful, right? I wish we had more time to continue because I still have more questions, but I think I'll see him behind the tent. Thank you so much, everybody. You have been such a fantastic audience. Thank you for giving us your time. Thank you for being patient. I know we started a little late, so thank you for your patience. Dennis is going to be signing books at the bookstore outside, so please grab a copy of this book. And I will say this, exactly as he said, he does not complicate his writing, and it comes on in the book. It's very simple, it's very accessible, the language is very easy. You can definitely finish the book in a day, promise. So please grab a copy of the book, and thank you so much, Dennis. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.